Normally, I start these initial impressions videos off with some B-roll, some music, a little opener, but not this time. There's some things we need to discuss first. Now, I may take the Nike Pegasus a little too seriously. I challenge you to find another shoe tuber, run YouTuber, whatever it is you want to call us, who runs as much in the Pegasus as I do. I had over 700 kilometers on 3 pairs last year of the Peg 40, so it's about 430 miles plus or so, who put it in their best of list for 2023. It was number 5 for me, and who has been so pro Pegasus on YouTube. I have a ton of Pegasus content on this channel, and unlike a lot of other shoe tubers, I actually run quite a bit in the Pegasus every year because I love the Pegasus. I always have loved the Pegasus, but additionally, the Pegasus is the default daily trainer to me. All other daily trainers, whether it's max cushion, low stack, whatever it is, they have to at least match or do better than the Pegasus. The Pegasus is the benchmark for every other daily trainer, period. Now, I am always excited about a new Pegasus coming out, and with the Peg 41, I followed all the leaks and all the prototypes very, very closely because I knew this update would be fairly large. And there would be significant updates to the Peg 41 because it's a odd model year, and the odd model years for the Pegasus are the ones where we get the bigger changes. Now, I was really concerned going into the Peg 41 because the prototype that we saw in the leaks changed multiple times, including a very last minute change in the midsole sculpting overall, which changed the shoe pretty drastically, really at the 11th hour. So I was really concerned. Additionally, the move to React X foam had me very concerned because I like React foam, and the only experience that we had up to this year now with React X foam was in the Infinity Run 4, which was a horrible shoe. I have a video about that, link in the description. So I was really concerned about this peg. But now that I've run in this peg, now that I have over 30 kilometers on this peg, which is the bare minimum that I'll do an initial impressions on, I can say that a lot of my concerns about the Peg 41 were unfounded, and this is a very, very good Nike Pegasus. The next video on the channel will be a direct comparison between the Peg 40 and the Peg 41, where I'll go into all the details and differences. And there's a lot of subtle differences between these two shoes. But for this video, I'm going to focus only on the Peg 41, and I will reference the Peg 40 occasionally where I have to, but otherwise I'm going to talk about what makes this shoe so good. And starting with the specs on this shoe, there's even a little crossed wires on the actual specs on this shoe. Now, the specs I'm going with for this shoe are 34 mil in the heel, 24 mil in the forefoot, giving you a 10 mil drop. I'll get to the weight in a moment. Back on April 11th, when Nike had their on-air event where they released the Pegasus Premium, I have a video on that, link in the description, and they announced the Peg 41 and showed the first official images, Tony Bignell, who is the VP of Footwear Innovation at Nike, gave a ton of interviews around the Pegasus Premium and the Peg 41. And in all of those interviews, he consistently said the Peg 41 has 1 more mil of foam across the board than the Peg 40 did. So that again puts it at 34-24. However, all of the Nike Pegasus release events that they've had across the world where they invite influencers and media to, they've been telling all of those people that there's actually 37-27 in this shoe. So it's actually a 3 or 4 mil increase. Now, I'm not sure where those wires are being crossed, but measuring this shoe, I get 24 mil of stack height in the midsole itself. And also Running Warehouse, the place where I use all their specs from, because they measure shoes crossband very consistently, also confirms that this is 34-24. Now, if I measure this shoe with the outsole included, you can see that I get 27 from the outsole, the bottom of the waffles or the lugs, to the top of the midsole. So maybe that's where the wires are being crossed. But this shoe is still a low stack shoe, and running in this shoe, there's absolutely no way this is a 27 mil shoe as far as the midsole height. This shoe feels extremely minimal on foot, more minimal than the Peg 3940 actually did. And as far as the weight, there's a bunch of conflicting numbers out there on the weight as well. For my US men's size 9, which again is the reference size, I get 278 grams or 9.8 ounces, making this shoe just a few grams lighter than the Peg 40, which is great because the Peg 40 was lighter than the Peg 39. So the Peg is going the right direction, though it's only, again, I think 4-5 grams difference, which you're not necessarily going to feel on foot. But again, it's good that the Peg is getting lighter and lighter every year because that's counter to a lot of other Nike shoes, which seem to be getting heavier and heavier every year. Moving to the upper of this shoe, Nike has said this is an engineered mesh. And I actually think the upper material on this Peg is a big leap forward. And I loved the upper on the Peg 40. In fact, one of the reasons I loved the Peg 40 over the Peg 39 so much, even though they're very similar shoes, was that upper material. But this upper is even lighter. It's even more forgiving, and it's even more compliant to the foot. In fact, the fiber that this upper, this engineered mesh upper, is made out of really reminds me of older Flywire material. I'm talking 2015, 16, 17 Nike Flywire. The classic Flywire, not whatever Nike calls Flywire now in 2024, but that older stuff from 10 years ago. This is that soft fabric that really conforms to the foot but holds your foot in. It's a really beautiful material, and I think a lot of the gaps in this upper really solves some of the overheating issues that you could run into with the Peg 40. And I run in a very hot, humid, wet environment, and I will admit the Peg 40 could feel a little warm once in a while, but this shoe so far has been very airy, very open. It sheds water really well. It's a beautiful upper material, and I think it is a huge upgrade over the 40. Another thing that Tony Bignell said at the on-air event back in Paris in April 11th was that they built this shoe on the same last as the Peg 40 because they liked the fit. So they said the midfoot materials are the same and the heel materials are the same, and the last is the same in the shoe. Now, as far as the midfoot, I can confirm that this is basically the same fit as the Peg 40 in the midfoot. In fact, it has the same arch lock system, which is a piece of fabric that you can see here that wraps under the foot, comes back around, wraps on this side. It really locks your midfoot down. Feels almost identical to the Peg 40, which is great. The heel counter and the Achilles flare is just as padded as the Peg 40 was. However, it's much higher now. One of the criticisms I had of the 40 was that the ankle collar and the Achilles flare felt very low, especially the ankle collar. This one feels kind of normal. It feels kind of what the Peg has always been. Also, the tongue in this shoe actually feels like it's the proper length. I think the tongue in the Peg 40 was a little too short, and it could cause some rubbing issues if you like low or no-show socks, which I do. But this one's been great. It's been giving me no problems. However, the difference in the last, I just cannot see how this is built on the same last as the Peg 40 or the Peg 39 because this shoe fits wider. This is a wider shoe. There is absolutely no doubt about that. In fact, when I measure the outsole contact patch, the outsole is actually 5 or 6 mil wider than the Peg 40 was. And I'll get to the outsole in a bit. So with this more forgiving Flywire-like material of the upper and a slightly wider shoe overall, there's a lot more room in the forefoot of this shoe. If you ever found the Pegasus 39 or 40 too narrow, this one's going to feel right at home because this is now, I would actually call this a wide fit. And I know this will come in a wide version. I can't imagine how wide that shoe will be. But if you even have a marginally wide foot or you're right on the edge of that, look at the standard width because this one is very accommodating in its fit. Moving to the midsole of this shoe, this is where probably the biggest change in this shoe comes from. And that is Nike moving the Pegasus platform from React Foam to React X Foam. Now, one of the things I was really concerned about, as I mentioned in the upfront, was this move to React X because, again, the experience of React X last year in the Infinity Run 4 was very poor. But I'm pleased to say that the React X foam in the Infinity Run 4 wasn't really the problem with the Infinity Run 4, even though I blamed it a lot on React X. React X in this shoe is actually quite nice. Now, React and React X foams are the same material. They're both a TPU foam. The difference is in manufacturing. React is made from compression molding, and React X is made from injection molding. And injection molding allows Nike to make a more open-celled, more consistent foam than compression molding does, which is where these 13% energy return claims are coming from that Nike's saying in the marketing for this shoe. And I will say, on foot and when you're running in this shoe, you do feel the bounce and the more resiliency to this foam. It does feel more energetic. There is more response to this foam. Now, we are not talking Zoom X response. This does not feel like Zoom X, but over React, it definitely has a considerable difference, and you will notice it almost immediately. I mentioned in the upfront that there was a last minute change to the sculpting of the midsole for this that we saw in the leaks. Really, the last month or so before we saw the official images for this shoe, we saw this big change to this midsole. Now, I've done a design analysis video on the Peg 41 already. I'll put a link in the description if you want to get all the details on what actually changed there. But what I will say is that there's a lot of attention paid to the sidewalls of this midsole, and I'll get into that in the ride. But there's a lot of control now around controlling supination and pronation, making this one of the most stable pegs in some time. And lastly, moving to the outsole, we still have this beautiful full rubber coverage, though this has been changed considerably for the better, and I'll talk about that in a bit. We still have the waffles, and as I said, there's about 5 or 6 mil of a wider contact patch in the forefoot of this shoe over the Peg 3940. Again, making this a very stable, very capable peg. Before I get into the ride of the Peg 41, we need to talk a little bit about the history of the Pegasus, especially over the past 5 years. Now, I've done a really in-depth video on this. I'll put a link in the description. It's over 40 minutes talking about why the Peg is the most important shoe in the Nike running line and how it shows kind of the direction of where Nike's going. So if you're interested in that, go check that video out. But for this video, we do need to talk about some recent history. So back in 2019, we had the Peg 36. And I think for a lot of people, the Peg 36 was the last good peg. I see this in my comments all the time. Everyone says the Peg 36 was the last good peg. Also in 2019, we had the Turbo 2. Now, this is everyone's favorite turbo, everyone's favorite Pegasus turbo. This is a shoe everyone wants to come back. Now, if you think about what else Nike had in 2019, they had a good Zoom Fly, they had the Vaporfly 4%. So you kind of had the best of a training rotation from a neutral shoe, a responsive shoe, a tempo trainer, and a great race shoe. Nike had it all in 2019. However, in 2020, we got the Peg 37. Now, a lot of people talk about how Nike killed the Peg Turbo, and they did discontinue the Turbo series in 2019. But in my mind, they didn't really kill the Turbo. What Nike tried to do in 2020 was combine the Peg, the standard Peg, and the Turbo into one shoe, and we got the Peg 37. And the Peg 37 was a very aggressive, very responsive Pegasus, almost to the point where it was borderline tempo shoe. Now, I loved the Peg 37. I thought the Peg 37 was an excellent shoe, but it did lose a lot of the versatility that the Peg always had. Now remember, in 2020, Nike also released the Infinity Run series, and I think the Infinity Run series was meant to be that neutral all-around cushion trainer, kind of what the Pegasus always had been. And if you think back to 2020, this is where we got the Vaporfly Next Percent and the original ELFL. Across the line, Nike was really making the Nike running line extremely aggressive in every shoe. And I would say it was almost too aggressive. Now, some people still love some of the shoes that came out this year, especially the original ELFL, and the Next Percent is still being raced in to this day. But what Nike did over the next 4 years with the Peg 38 was dial the peg down a little bit. And they did this again across their entire running line. They were dialing down the shoes, taking the aggression out little by little by little. From the Peg 37 to the Peg 38, we got a slightly softer Pegasus. The Peg 38 was a even number. years, so it's only a minor update on the 37. So Nike did what it could. They softened the airbag out. They made a more accommodating upper. They tried. I didn't really care for the Peg 38 compared to the 37, but it was what it was. In 2022, we got the Peg 39. Now, I thought at the time this was Nike kind of almost getting back to the 36, but I kind of was wrong at that time, and we'll get to that in a moment. Peg 39 did bring back some of the versatility in the peg, but it was still a little too aggressive, a little bit too narrow for a lot of people. With the 40 that came out last year in 2023, we got, again, a little bit more toned down. We got a much more accommodating upper, and I think the Pegasus 40 was getting very close back to where the Peg 36 was. But with the Peg 41, I'm going to say Nike has now come back almost completely to where the Peg 36 was. And interestingly, also this year, we're going to see a Pegasus Plus, or this has been called the Turbo 4. Now, there's no details about this shoe. It's not even confirmed that's going to be coming out, but we've seen a lot of leaked prototypes and almost production-ready shoes. It's going to come out. Jury's out on this one, whether it's going to run like a Turbo or not. Let's assume it is. But what Nike's essentially done over the past 4 years is they've gotten back to where they were in 2019. So from the peg standpoint, we can pretty much ignore the past 4 years. And if you were a runner that loved the Peg 36 and you thought the Peg 36 was the last good peg, you may want to give the Peg 41 a try, because the Peg 41 really, really reminds me of the Peg 36, almost in every way. And one of the biggest things that contributes to that is this outsole. Nike's even gone back to the Peg 36 outsole, fundamentally simplified it with a big piece of rubber in the forefoot. You've got that now channel down the middle in the heel, which makes that much softer and makes the shoe center itself much better. Essentially, you can look at the Peg 41 as the update to the Peg 36, ignoring the past 4 years. And I think that's going to make a lot of people very happy. That's right. I think the Peg 41 is the logical successor to the Peg 36. This shoe feels absolutely nothing like the Peg 40. And I love the Peg 40. I put a lot of miles or kilometers into the Peg 40. But I watched a lot of other reviews saying that this shoe doesn't feel much different than the Peg 40. Did they even run in this shoe? Because this shoe has nothing to do with the Peg 40. In fact, all of the Peg 37, 38, 39, 40, all of the feel of those pegs are removed out of this shoe. Within the first 2 kilometers of running in this shoe, I immediately was taken back to what I used to love about the Peg 36. Now, it's been 5 years since I ran in the Peg 36, and some of this is nostalgia, but what I remember from the Peg 36 was a very neutral, very flat, very wide forefoot that gave a very stable ride that put a lot of emphasis on me doing the work, for me to push into the ground, drive off the toe, and really work on the training effect of what I'm doing, of why I'm running, why I'm training. This shoe puts the emphasis on you to do the work, and that's why I love the Peg. And the Peg 37 through 40 did that as well. But this shoe's really reminiscent of 2019 or maybe 2018, because the Peg 35 and 36 were very similar. They were essentially the same shoe. This is a shoe that feels like an older shoe. And I think that's brilliant because it makes this shoe even more of a breath of fresh air than it already was. And what do I mean by that? Well, in this world of max stack, max cushion, max rocker sameness, where every manufacturer seems to be turning every one of their shoes into the exact same shoe, the Peg has always been a bit of an oddball. It's never been a shoe that really adjusts to the trends of whatever's going on in running. This has been a very consistent shoe that has small iterative changes year over year, and we end up with a shoe that changes very slowly. A lot of people every year always say, this is a boring shoe. This shoe needs to change. This shoe needs this shoe needs that. The Pegasus needs to become more modern. No, it doesn't. The Pegasus needs to stay what the Pegasus is. And Nike has really, really honed in on that. And they brought the Pegasus back to what I think objectively it's considered the last great peg, the Peg 36. Because that was the last peg that was very neutral. It was very accommodating. It was a shoe that really, you literally could go out and do anything in. 37, 38, 39, 40 also could do that, but they were a little bit more aggressive. They were a little too narrow. They were a little too tight fitting. They were a little too amped up because of the airbags in them. And this shoe has removed all of that. Nike has gone back to first principles with the Pegasus, and it's brilliant. This is a brilliant Pegasus. The first run I did in this shoe was a 10 mile or 16K run on a route that I run all of the time. If you follow me on Strava, link in the description, you can see that. And this shoe felt great. Now, I've run on that route on a ton of shoes, especially this year. I've been testing every shoe on that route, and this was one of the best feeling shoes on that route. And now that's flat, it's on a river, but it's very consistent. And if a shoe isn't good about being consistent, just ticking off kilometer after kilometer, you're gonna feel it. If the foam isn't right, if there's not enough rebound or bounce or energy return in the foam, you're gonna feel it. This shoe felt incredible across all of that run. Usually a peg takes a little bit to break in for me. It takes a couple runs because the foam needs to soften up a little bit. The airbag often needs to settle in the shoe, create the pocket in there. It just needs to kind of mold to my foot. This one didn't need it. It just felt great out of the box. In fact, the next day I did a 15K run in this shoe, picked up the pace a little bit in there, did a little bit of marathon pace, a little bit of half marathon pace, and it was some work to do those faster paces, but you know what? From a training effect standpoint, this shoe was great. I felt very strong. I was digging into the ground, great toe off, very neutral. There's no additional rocker in the shoe getting in my way. It just worked, and it worked like a peg should. There was no nonsense about this shoe. It just did what it was there to do, which is to protect your foot, cushion your foot, and get out of the way. Puts the emphasis on you to do the work, and it does it brilliantly. I have a ton of versus or comparison videos planned for this shoe that will be coming out over the next week that will be comparing this shoe against all the other traditional trainers that I've been talking a lot about recently on this channel. And I'm going to admit, there will probably be a more cushioned, a more modern, probably a more versatile, and probably a faster shoe compared to this. However, none of them are the peg. Now, I'm also going to admit, I do have a bit of a bias for the Pegasus. Some of it's nostalgia, some of it's sentimentality, but even if the shoe wasn't labeled Pegasus, I'd still be giving it a glowing review because in 2024 of Max Stack, Max Tech, everything, and I'm a running shoe tech channel. I love all the tech, but I don't want to run in it all of the time. This is a breath of fresh air. This is a modern shoe with modern materials, so you don't need to go online and buy a shoe that's 5, 6, 7 years old to get this feel. Nike is giving you this in a current generation shoe of a very, very traditional trainer. If you're someone who liked the Peg 36 many years ago, give this shoe a shot. You may be surprised. Now, it's going to take some getting used to, especially if you're used to the more max cushion shoes, because this shoe is going to feel very low to the ground. Even for me, someone who likes low stack shoes and runs in them often, this shoe feels very low to the ground. But I promise you, it's worth it. Reconnecting to your feet, reconnecting to your stride, reconnecting to how your shoe interfaces the ground and how you toe off, it's worth it. And this is the shoe to do it in. It is a great training tool, and it's one that I'm going to be spending a lot more time in, and I will definitely be back with further videos on the wonderful Pegasus 41. Thank you for making it to the end of the video. If you find this content useful, consider subscribing. You'll see more content from me pop up in your feed. If not, drop a like on this video because it helps this channel continue to grow, which I always appreciate. And with that, I'll catch you in the next one.